go back to that night. I almost remember it clear as day. I've been to my cabin over 1,000 times. It's a place where I can breathe, you know. I smell the pine trees, I listen to the wind, maybe see some wildlife. A typical evening would be I might do some fishing, and we'll probably go spotting for some deer. If I get lucky, I'll see one. And then head back to the cabin and have a beer on my porch. But that night, though, something was really off. I can't quite put my finger on it, but, you know, the air felt different, you know? The forest is usually full of sounds, critters, rustling leaves. You hear crunching. Sometimes we even get lucky enough in here now. But that night, it was like the forest was holding its breath. Like, I remember thinking to myself, something's not right, John. But I shrugged it off. I thought, maybe it's the weather playing tricks on me, or maybe I'm just getting tired. Maybe it was the beer. I went about my routine. I set up a trail cam, and, well, that's when things got really strange. I often set up trail cams all around my property, especially when I'm at the cabin. It's kind of a hobby of mine. I love catching snippets of local wildlife, going about their business, you know. I sometimes get coyotes, raccoons, deer, all different kind of animals. It's really fascinating to watch those candid moments when they don't know they're being watched, you know. But on that day, I bought a new trail cam with me. It was a more advanced model. It had an awesome night vision, and I thought it would be a good idea to set it up on some of the usual paths, you know, that the wildlife are taking, where I often see these deer tracks. It's a clearing not too far from my cabin, right where the woods started to get a little darker and denser. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, maybe just some good shots of some deer, hopefully get a buck, maybe even a fox if I was lucky. The thought of capturing something more hadn't even crossed my mind. It's just something I do when I'm out there, like a way of connecting with nature when I'm back in town. Little did I know that camera was gonna pick up that night. Probably around 9 p.m. or so. That's when the forest gets dark pretty quick as soon as that sun goes down. You know, it's that time of night when the last of the daylight has faded and all the forest sounds really start to come alive. If you've ever been out there, all those nocturnal sounds. Well, I set up that trail cam on this sturdy old oak tree, which oversees that pathway I talked about. And I recall it was a particularly clear night. The kind where the moon and stars provide just enough light to see, but the air was still, almost quiet. Almost too quiet. It felt like a calm before the storm, you know? Once the camera was set up and working, I headed back to my cabin, and I started looking forward to a quiet night and the prospect of some interesting wildlife footage in the morning. After setting up the trail cam, I headed back to the cabin. It was just a short walk, but really felt longer. You know, somehow it felt like it took forever. The unusual nocturnal sounds of the forest were even subdued. But back in the cabin, I made myself some dinner, something simple, can of beans, little grilled venison, made up on the stove from a previous hunt earlier that year. I remember it was still quiet outside, but too quiet, as I mentioned. And it was around that time I felt this sense of uneasiness, like something was watching me, or I wasn't alone out here. I really tried to brush it off. I chalked it up to that eeriness of the silent woods. Maybe the wildlife have moved to another part of the woods or the forest that night. So, I basically finished my dinner, I cleaned up, and decided to hit the sack early, call it a night. But I'll tell you, that sleep didn't come easy. I kept tossing and turning. The stillness outside was just disconcerting, and in the middle of the night, I kind of jolted awake by a sound I'll never, ever forget. It was unlike anything I've ever heard in the woods, and I've been in the woods a lot. The sound, even thinking about it right now, sends a shiver down my spine. I was lying there in the dark, with the cabin silent around me when I heard it. It started off kind of faint, like a distant echo, and it was sort of like a growl, I guess. But not like any animal growl I've heard before. It was guttural, it was deep. It resonated in a way that seemed to vibrate right through me. Some sort of low rumble that crescendoed into a sharp, high-pitched wail, almost like a bloody scream, before falling back into a growl. Now remember, I'm an outdoorsman, so I've heard bears, coyotes, bobcats, but this was definitely something else. This sound seemed to echo through the silent woods and filled the night with a sense of dread, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for what's going to come next, like we were both scared. As for me, I was frozen in my bed, my heart was pounding out of my chest, and my first thought was, what on earth was that? I mean, I've spent years in these woods, and you bet in all my years in the Michigan wilderness, I've never experienced anything quite like this. First thought that raced through my head was, is this some sort of animal I've never encountered before? Right? I'm thinking, is it some type of Michigan wolverine? Is it a panther? I mean, I've heard all sorts of sounds in the woods, but this was different, like alien-like. But then, as the sound got closer, it seemed to vibrate through the very walls of my cabin. I remember my mind racing. All sorts of wild possibilities. What can this be? Could it be someone playing a prank? Could it be somebody in distress? I need to go out and help. My gut told me otherwise, though. This is something raw, primal, that you typically would never hear. It basically just made me think it wasn't human. I remember this chill running down my spine. My heart was pounding so hard that I broke into a deep sweat. And for a moment, I was frozen, just frozen in time, just listening to that sound getting closer and closer. I couldn't move, could hardly breathe. And then I mustered up all the courage I had to move, and next thing I know, I was out of there. What was causing that terrifying noise? After all, it was in its territory, and there was an intruder in the quiet of the night. But I'll tell you, nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. I'll give you all the details. With that chilling sound getting closer, I slowly crept out of my bed. My heart was pounding so loud, and I'm sure whatever it was, they could hear it. I moved towards the cabin window, trying to make little noise as possible and be quiet and stealth. The moon out there was casting kind of a pale light over the forest, if you ever been out there, when the moon has this very pale light, enough that you can see some eerie shadows to dance between the trees. Is your eyes playing tricks on you or whatnot. I remember how cold the window was under my fingertips as I peered out into that forest. My eyes were straining into the darkness beyond the edge of the clearing towards the direction of that sound, and I was trying to make light of what is going on out there. What am I hearing? And then, kind of like in a silhouetted undergrowth, I saw movement. Something was emerging from that dense thicket. Something large. And as I stepped in the clearing, the moonlight fell on it, and I couldn't believe my eyes. This creature, I tell you, it was nothing like I've ever seen before. Standing on two legs, it was tall, far taller than any man, covered head to toe in thick, matted down fur. His cut the moonlight and glowed with such an intense, unsettling light. This wasn't a bear, this wasn't a wolf. Nothing I've recognized in all my years of hunting in the wilderness. And then it paused, raised its head, and scenting the air. Now, some of you may have seen a bear, how they scent the air with their nose. I can remember freezing in place, barely daring to breathe, like I wasn't gonna, I was holding my breath. I was terrified it was gonna hear me, it would see me, but it didn't. Instead, it just turned and vanished back into the forest, leaving behind nothing but the echo of that gut-wrenching sound. And I stood there, rooted to my spot, kind of trying to make sense in my mind of what I just witnessed, and this real sense of fear. And I don't get scared easily. Just from what I could tell, disturbingly human-like, but also not. Kind of looked like a human, but really not. It had a broad forehead that tapered in almost like a snout, but it wasn't a snout. It's not like a bear or wolf snout. It was more flat, more human. The jawline, I would say, was strong and pronounced, filled with what looked like sharp teeth when it opened its mouth. But it was those eyes. Those eyes were deeply, heavy, prominent brows. They glowed in that moonlight, and they were so eerie and yellowish, almost like a cat's eyes at night. And they were intelligent. It was like they had a certain awareness about them that felt almost knowing. It was just something so primal and wild about its face, but just so unsettling. I can remember that face even now. It was both fascinating and terrifying, because what I saw didn't fit into any category I knew. It was like the wilderness had thrown me a curveball, challenging what I thought I knew about this natural world. And just to think, I captured it on my trail cam. It's almost unbelievable. But the footage is there. Alright, let's try to walk through the footage. I'll do my best. As you said, the footage kind of begins at 1:30 in the morning, 1:33 a.m. As you see in the pathway I mentioned earlier, it's pretty open, but surrounded by all that dense forest we talked about. And it was quiet. Now pay close attention to the top right corner of the screen. size compared to the trees. It's far larger than any typical forest animal. As I described earlier, it's standing upright with two legs, kind of robust, muscular frame, covered in this black, brown, dark fur. And then, there, it pauses, kind of raises its head, and sniffs the air. You can see its eyes catching the moonlight with that eerie glow I was talking about. And then right here shortly after, it turns its head, almost like it's looking directly into the camera. That's a chilling moment for me every time I watch this footage, because that face, partially shadowed out, but you can see some of the features I described. And then, as quick as it appeared, and abruptly leaves. It blends right back into the wilderness, and the footage continues for a while, but it doesn't come back. It just vanished, leaving behind an empty, eerie scene. That's the footage. It's hard to believe, but even when you see it with your own eyes, it's right there, right? The encounter, the footage, they've left me rattled, I'm rattled. But I'm also fascinated. The wilderness has always been my retreat. I'm a fisherman, I'm a hunter. It's a place for me for my peace and solitude. But now it has a different meaning. It feels different. It's more unpredictable, definitely unnerving. I mean, I've walked into a hunt so many times in complete darkness just by starlight, and moonlight. I'll tell you, it's different now. That being said, I've always respected nature and its inhabitants, even when they don't fit into our definition or our understanding. And despite the fear, there's also a sense of awe, curiosity in me that thinks about this creature and what its existence really means for our understanding of wildlife. So, yes, I do plan on going back, not out of some reckless, thrill-seeking treasure hunt, but because it's part of who I am. My love for the wilderness, it's quite solitude and quiet, really my zen. And has its unexpected surprises, and that hasn't changed. But if anything, this experience really deepened it. It's shown me that there's still so much we don't know out there, and really so much to discover. I'm planning on taking some precautions, though, of course. I'll be more alert. I'm going to be more aware of my surroundings. Not that I already wasn't, but even more so. I'll respect the creature's space. I'm going to avoid encroaching on its territory as much as possible. And who knows? Maybe I'll set up more trail cams. And if this creature is out there, there might be others. While that's terrifying, it's also exciting.